The registered letter sat unopened on Robert Callahan's kitchen counter for 3 days. He'd seen enough certified mail from the Whispering Pines Ranch Homeowners Association to know exactly what it contained. More complaints, more restrictions, more bureaucratic nonsense. At 58, with callous hands from 30 years of construction work and a stubborn streak wider than the creek cutting through his 20 acres, Robert had purchased this land to finally live on his own terms. The irony that he'd inadvertently bought into an HOA-controlled development wasn't lost on him. That morning, as dawn broke over the eastern ridge of his property, Robert stood on his back porch, sipping black coffee, surveying the excavation site where his dream project was taking shape. The 10-foot-deep basin stretched nearly an acre wide, its freshly dug earth dark and rich against the surrounding grassland. 3 weeks of work with his old Caterpillar excavator, weekends and evenings after his regular contracting jobs, had transformed what was once an unused, marshy corner of his property into the beginnings of a proper pond. "Looking good, isn't it, girl?" he said to his aging black lab, Sadie, who thumped her tail in agreement. The pond wasn't just aesthetic. It would serve as irrigation during the dry Montana summers, a habitat for local wildlife, and maybe even stock some trout once it filled properly. Robert had researched everything meticulously: water rights, environmental impact, proper construction techniques. He even consulted a local hydrologist about the natural spring that would keep the pond naturally replenished. What he hadn't counted on was the wrath of Elaine Winters, the HOA president who lived in the development's largest home nearly a mile away. It somehow maintained telescopic vision for any covenant violations. The kitchen phone rang, interrupting his peaceful moment. Robert recognized the number. "Morning, James," he answered, greeting his neighbor from 2 properties over. "Rob, you need to open that letter," James said, skipping pleasantries. "Elaine called an emergency HOA meeting last night. It's about your pond." Robert's jaw tightened. "What about my pond? It's on my property, well within my rights. She's saying you violated Section 8 of the covenants. No major landscaping alterations without committee approval. They voted to fine you, Rob, and it's pretty severe." Robert carried his coffee back to the kitchen counter and stared at the letter. With a sigh, he tore it open, unfolding the official letterhead of the Whispering Pines Ranch Homeowners Association. He scanned past the formal greeting and legal jargon until he reached the numbers that made his coffee mug freeze midway to his lips. $50,000 per day until the unauthorized water feature was returned to its original condition. "They can't be serious," he muttered, but the multiple signatures at the bottom, led by Elaine's elaborate cursive, suggested deadly seriousness. "Did you read it?" James asked over the still-open line. $50,000 a day? That's more than I paid for the damn excavator. This is insanity. Elaine's claiming your pond will decrease property values, attract mosquitoes, and pose a drowning hazard. She also mentioned something about water rights violations. Robert's free hand balled into a fist. "I got all the proper permits from the county. I checked water rights before I dug the first shovelful. I know that, and a few others do too. But Elaine's got most of the committee convinced you're creating some kind of environmental disaster." Through the kitchen window, Robert could see the morning sun now glistening on the small amount of water already collecting in the deepest part of his pond. Just yesterday, he'd spotted a pair of mallards investigating the new feature. The thought of filling it all in made his chest tighten. "I'm not filling it in, James. This is my land. I've wanted this pond for 30 years. Then you better get a lawyer because Elaine's already talking about lions on your property if you don't comply within 7 days. After hanging up, Robert walked back outside, Sadie following faithfully. The morning's peace was shattered. As he stared at his half-finished project, what had been a source of pride now loomed as a potential financial catastrophe. But something in him, perhaps the same stubbornness that had sustained him through decades of physical labor and life's hardships, refused to surrender. "I'm not backing down this time," he told Sadie, who looked up at him with trusting eyes. "This is where we draw the line." Little did Robert know that his personal stand against the Whispering Pines HOA would soon escalate into a battle that would divide the entire community and test the limits of property rights in ways he never imagined. The county records office was housed in a bland government building that smelled of old paper and industrial cleaner. Robert sat across from Marjorie Hayes, a county clerk who worked there since before Robert had purchased his property 15 years ago. Her fingers moved methodically through a stack of documents as Robert anxiously tapped his boot against the linoleum floor. "Here we go," she said finally, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "The original property covenant for Whispering Pines Ranch Development, filed 1998, amended 2010 and 2018. Robert leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I need to understand exactly what these covenants say about water features. The HOA is threatening me with fines that would bankrupt me in a week." Marjorie adjusted her reading glasses. "Elaine Winters again. That woman's turned more neighbors against each other than a fence line dispute. She flipped through the pages with practiced efficiency before stopping at Section 8. Here's the landscaping restrictions. Requires approval for, and I quote, significant alterations to the natural landscape visible from community roadways or neighboring properties. My pond is in the back corner of my property, Robert protested. You need binoculars to see it from the road. But is it visible from neighboring properties? Robert hesitated. Maybe from the ridgeline of the Baldwin Place, but they're half a mile away. That might be enough for Elaine, Marjorie warned. She continued scanning. Wait a minute. There's something else you should see. She flipped forward several pages to an appendix. The amended covenants from 2018 specifically mention water features. Did you vote on this amendment? I never vote on those things, Robert admitted. The meetings are always on Tuesday evenings when I'm working my second job. Well, someone added language prohibiting standing water collections exceeding 500 square feet without express written approval from the architectural committee. She looked up at Robert. How big is your pond? About an acre. Marjorie winced. That's over 40,000 square feet. Robert ran a hand through his gray-streaked hair. But that's ridiculous. Half the properties out there have stock ponds. The Hendersons have that giant swimming pool with the waterfall feature. All approved by the committee? I'd wager. Marjorie's expression softened. Listen, Robert, I've seen this play out before. These HOAs have real legal teeth. The courts generally uphold covenant restrictions, even ones that seem unreasonable. As Robert drove home, the folder of documents sat heavily on the passenger seat where Sadie usually rode. He'd left her at home today, not wanting to leave her in the truck during the Montana heat. The further he drove from town toward the foothills where his property sat, the more his anger built. He'd bought this land precisely because it was outside city limits with enough space to live how he wanted. When he pulled into his gravel driveway, he was surprised to see 3 vehicles parked near his house. James's pickup truck, a white SUV, he recognized as belonging to the Garcias from down the road, and a sleek black Tesla he'd never seen before. James was standing on the porch with Miguel Garcia and a tall man in pressed khakis and a blue button-down shirt. Robert approached cautiously. Afternoon, he called out. Didn't realize I was hosting a gathering today. James stepped forward. Rob, this is David Chen. He just moved into the old Peterson place last month, and he might be able to help us. The man in the button-down extended his hand. Mr. Callahan, pleasure to meet you. I'm an environmental attorney. James told me about your situation with the HOA. Robert shook his hand, suspicion mixing with a flicker of hope. Environmental attorney? I specialize in water rights and property disputes, David explained, and I have some personal experience with overzealous homeowners associations. Miguel Garcia, usually quiet at community gatherings, spoke up. Robert, we heard about the fines. Elaine's gone too far this time. First, it was my workshop being too visible, then the Joneses' fence color, now your pond. Someone needs to stand up to her. Inside Robert's modest ranch house, the 4 men gathered around his kitchen table. Sadie settled at Robert's feet as David reviewed the covenant documents. They did technically follow procedure with this amendment, David confirmed after a careful reading. But there's something interesting here. He pointed to a clause in the original covenant. The founding document states that any amendment affecting water usage, wildlife habitat, or natural resource management must be filed with both the county and the state environmental office. And? Robert asked. David's smile was small but significant. I checked with the state office this morning after James called me. His 2018 amendment was never filed with them. That's a procedural violation that could invalidate the amendment entirely. For the first time since receiving the letter, Robert felt a spark of possibility. So they can't enforce the water feature restriction. Potentially. It's a solid legal argument, but not a guarantee. HOAs have significant leeway in the courts. David placed his hands flat on the table. But there's something else working in your favor. I did some digging on Elaine Winters and the current HOA board. James leaned forward. What'd you find? 3 of the 5 board members, including Elaine, have property that borders the creek downstream from your pond site, David explained. I strongly suspect this isn't about property values or aesthetics. It's about water access. Your pond, if properly engineered, would regulate water flow during spring runoff, potentially benefiting properties downstream. But it would also give you first access to that water. Robert's eyes widened with understanding. They're worried about their water rights. Exactly. And that changes this from a simple covenant violation to a potential conflict of interest in HOA governance. David pulled out his laptop. If you're willing to fight this, I think we have a case not just to save your pond, but potentially to challenge some of the HOA's authority altogether. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the kitchen windows, the 4 men began outlining a strategy. For the first time in years, Robert felt a connection to his neighbors he'd never expected. a shared frustration with the restrictions that had slowly eroded the freedom they'd all sought in country living. "I'm in," Robert said finally. "What's our first move?" David closed his laptop with a decisive click. "We request a special meeting of all HOA members, not just the board. We present our case directly to your neighbors, because I suspect you're not the only one who's tired of Elaine's reign." As his unexpected allies prepared to leave, Robert walked them out to the excavation site. The pond basin had collected more water overnight, now deep enough that it reflected the cloud-streaked sky above. A blue heron stood motionless at one edge, hunting in the shallows, nature already embracing what bureaucracy sought to destroy. "Worth fighting for," James said quietly beside him. Robert nodded, watching the heron lift gracefully into flight. "Always has been." The Whispering Pines Community Center was filled beyond capacity. Robert stood at the back, surveying the crowd with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Word had spread quickly throughout the development's 38 properties, and nearly every household was represented. The babble of conversation created a nervous energy in the room, something unprecedented in the normally sparsely attended HOA meetings. Elaine Winters sat at the front table with the other board members, her posture rigid as she whispered urgently to Frank Simmons, the HOA treasurer. Her eyes darted repeatedly toward the door, clearly unsettled by the unexpected turnout. When she finally called the meeting to order, her voice carried a forced pleasantness that didn't match her expression. Before we address the special agenda items requested by certain members, she began, glancing pointedly at Robert. "The board has announcements regarding the summer landscaping schedule and the upcoming point of order." David Chin interrupted, rising from his seat in the second row. "According to HOA bylaws, Section 3, Article 4, when a special meeting is called by petition of the members, those agenda items must be addressed first." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elaine's smile tightened. "Mr. Chen, is it? You're new to our community. I don't believe you've been formally recognized by the chair." "Actually, Mrs. Winters," David replied calmly, "as a homeowner in good standing, I have the right to speak when proper procedure isn't being followed." He held up a copy of the bylaws. "I'm happy to cite the relevant section if you'd like." From the other side of the room, Miguel Garcia stood up. "I second Mr. Chen's point of order." Outnumbered and aware of the room's attention, Elaine conceded with a curt nod. "Very well. The board recognizes Robert Callahan's petition regarding his landscaping dispute." Robert moved to the front of the room, aware of all eyes upon him. Public speaking had never been his strong suit, but anger and determination propelled him forward. James gave him an encouraging nod from his seat. "Thanks for coming, everyone," Robert began, his voice gruff with emotion. "Most of you know me. I've lived here 15 years. Never caused trouble. Never complained when the HOA fees tripled. Never objected when new rules kept getting added." He cleared his throat, glancing down at the notes he prepared but finding them inadequate for what he needed to say. "I bought my land because I wanted space to live my life. My pond project isn't hurting anyone. It's properly engineered, environmentally beneficial, and it's on my own property. My back 20 acres that nobody can even see unless they're trespassing." Robert held up the threatening letter. "The board has decided to fine me $50,000 per day until I destroy my pond. Not $50, not $500, $50,000. That's more than many of us paid for our properties." Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. Several homeowners leaned forward to whisper to neighbors, clearly shocked by the amount. "That can't be right," called out Martha Jenkins, an elderly woman who'd lived in Whispering Pines since its inception. "Our covenants don't allow for punitive damages like that." Frank Simmons, the treasurer, shifted uncomfortably. "The board determined that the environmental impact justified the emergency measure." David stood again. "What environmental study was conducted to make that determination? Was a hydrologist consulted? An environmental engineer?" "The board doesn't need to justify its decisions to enforce the covenants," Elaine cut in sharply. "Mr. Callahan knew the rules when he moved here." "Actually," David continued, addressing the room rather than Elaine, "I'd like to bring everyone's attention to a critical procedural issue." He distributed packets to several audience members. The 2018 amendment restricting water features was never properly filed with the State Environmental Office as required by the original covenant. Legally speaking, it's unenforceable. Elaine's face flushed. "That's a mere technicality. It's the law," David countered. "And there's something else everyone should know." He paused, looking directly at Elaine. 3 board members, including Mrs. Winters, own properties that would be directly affected by water flow changes from Mr. Callahan's pond. Yet none of them recused themselves from voting on his penalty. That's a clear conflict of interest. The room erupted into heated conversations. Robert noticed several homeowners looking at Elaine with new suspicion. James called out above the noise, "I move that we immediately suspend all fines against Robert Callahan pending a proper legal review of the covenant amendments." "Second," came multiple voices at once. Elaine banged her gavel repeatedly. This is out of order. The board has sole authority to. Actually interrupted a soft-spoken man Robert recognized as Dr. Patterson from the North Ridge. According to Article 7, members can override board decisions with a two-thirds majority vote at any properly called meeting. The tension in the room was palpable as Elaine struggled to maintain control. Her eyes darted between faces, registering with growing alarm that she was losing her audience. With visible effort, she composed herself. Fine, we'll put it to a vote. Those in favor of temporarily suspending enforcement actions against Mr. Callahan's covenant violations. Nearly every hand in the room went up. Robert felt a lump form in his throat at the show of support. Those opposed? Only Elaine and two board members raised their hands. Motion carries, she said through gritted teeth, but this doesn't change the fact that the water feature violates our community standards. This is merely a temporary reprieve. As the meeting continued, Robert slipped outside for some air. The evening sky was turning a deep purple with the first stars appearing overhead. He heard the door open behind him and turned to see Martha Jenkins approaching with her cane. You know, she said without preamble, my husband and I were the third family to build in Whispering Pines, back when the developers promised it would be a place where people could have their space but still be part of a community. Robert nodded respectfully. It's a beautiful area. The HOA was never meant to be what Elaine's turned it into, Martha continued. It was supposed to keep people from letting their properties become eyesores, not dictate every detail of our lives. She peered up at him with sharp eyes. I remember when your land was nothing but scrub and rock. You made something beautiful there. Thank you, ma'am. Your pond, does it really help with the spring runoff? The flood control? Yes, ma'am. Acts as a natural retention basin. Should help everyone downstream, actually. Martha nodded slowly. Did you know I've been on the county water board for 20 years? Robert blinked in surprise. No, ma'am, I didn't. A smile creased her weathered face. Elaine doesn't know either. She never bothered to ask. You come by my place tomorrow with your pond plans. I think there might be a county flood mitigation grant that could help you finish that project properly. Might even get the county to declare it a beneficial public works project. For the first time in weeks, Robert felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. I'd appreciate that very much. Inside, the meeting continued, but something fundamental had shifted in Whispering Pines Ranch. As Robert looked through the window at his neighbors, people he'd barely spoken to in 15 years, he realized that in fighting for his pond, he might have uncovered something even more valuable, a community willing to stand together against unreasonable authority. The battle wasn't over, but Robert was no longer fighting alone. The morning after the HOA meeting, Robert woke before dawn, motivated by a new sense of purpose. After a quick breakfast, he drove his pickup to Martha Jenkins' property, carrying his pond engineering plans and water management documentation. What he expected to be a brief conversation turned into a 3-hour strategy session. Martha's modest living room with its view of the Eastern Ridge became command central as she made phone calls to county officials she'd worked with during her decades on the water board. Randy, it's Martha Jenkins. Remember that flood mitigation initiative we discussed last spring? I've got a project that fits the criteria perfectly. She winked at Robert as she continued her conversation, scribbling notes in precise handwriting. By noon, Robert had an appointment with the County Environmental Resources Department and a preliminary application for the Water Management Grant Program. Martha's reputation carried significant weight, and her endorsement opened doors that would have remained firmly closed to Robert alone. Don't get overconfident, she warned as he prepared to leave. Elaine won't take this lying down. She didn't build that real estate empire of hers by backing off when challenged. Real estate empire? Robert asked, pausing at the door. Martha's eyebrows rose. You didn't know? Elaine owns 6 properties in Whispering Pines through various LLCs. She's been using the HOA to enhance her investments for years. Why do you think the restrictions always seem to benefit the valley properties she controls? This new information settled like a stone in Robert's stomach as he drove home. The conflict was deeper than he'd realized. When he pulled into his driveway, he immediately noticed the unfamiliar truck parked near his pond excavation. A man in county uniform was taking photographs of the site. Robert parked and approached cautiously. Can I help you? The man turned, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Callahan? I'm Terry Wilson with County Code Enforcement. We received a complaint about unpermitted excavation work on this property. I got all my permits, Robert said, his hackles rising. Filed everything properly before I started digging. Yes, sir. I can see that in our system. Terry gestured to his tablet. But the complaint specifically mentions possible wetland encroachment. Once a wetland complaint is filed, we're required to investigate and potentially issue a stop work order until an environmental assessment is completed. Robert clenched his jaw. Let me guess, complaint filed this morning? Terry nodded reluctantly. About 2 hours ago. It was unusually detailed. Elaine's counterattack had been swift and calculated. Robert spent the remainder of the day on the phone, first with David Chen, then with the environmental engineer who'd helped design his pond system. By sunset, he'd secured letters from both attesting that the project actually enhanced the seasonal wetland rather than damaged it, but the process would still delay his work by at least 2 weeks while the assessment was completed. As if sensing his frustration, Sadie pressed her graying muzzle against his leg while he stood at the edge of the partially completed pond, watching the sunset reflect off its surface. "She's fighting dirty, girl," he told the dog. "But so can we." The following day, a community email chain began circulating among Whispering Pines residents, initiated by Miguel Garcia and quickly populated with responses. The subject was simple: HOA overreach. Share your stories. The floodgates opened. Dozens of homeowners contributed accounts of their run-ins with Elaine and the board. The Thompsons had been fined for their daughter's graduation party because guest vehicles exceeded permitted driveway capacity. The Yamamotos had been denied permission to install solar panels despite state laws protecting renewable energy installations. The Johnsons had received violation notices about their wheelchair ramp's unapproved design despite its ADA compliance. Pattern after pattern emerged of selective enforcement, arbitrary rulings, and personal vendettas thinly disguised as covenant protection. By the week's end, David Chen had compiled enough evidence to suggest not just mismanagement, but potentially illegal actions by the board. James organized an informal gathering at his property that Saturday, officially a barbecue, unofficially a strategy session. Nearly 20 neighbors attended, many meeting each other properly for the first time despite years of living in the same community. The irony, Dr. Patterson observed, sipping lemonade on James' deck, is that Elaine's dictatorial approach has finally accomplished what our community-building initiatives never could. She's united us all against her. As hamburgers sizzled on the grill, David outlined their options. "We have 3 paths forward," he explained to the gathered neighbors. "First, we can petition for a special election to replace the current board. Second, we can file a formal complaint with the State Real Estate Commission regarding Elaine's undisclosed conflicts of interest. Or third, the nuclear option, dissolve the HOA entirely." A murmur went through the crowd at the last suggestion. "Is that even possible?" asked Susan Yamamoto, who'd become one of the movement's most vocal supporters after sharing her solar panel story. With a 75% vote of all property owners, yes, David confirmed. The founding covenants included a dissolution clause. It's rarely invoked, but it exists. As the discussion continued, Robert found himself drawn into conversations with neighbors he'd previously known only by sight. The Garcias had a daughter studying hydrology at the State University who offered to help document the watershed benefits of his pond. The Pattersons had photographs from the 1990s showing that Robert's wetland had once been a stock pond for the original ranch, crucial historical evidence for his county appeal. The community Robert had never fully engaged with was not only rallying around his cause, but finding common purpose in standing against years of HOA tyranny. When Robert returned home that evening, he was surprised to find a Whispering Pines security vehicle parked in his driveway, a service the HOA contracted for occasional patrols. The security guard, a young man Robert didn't recognize, approached with an official-looking envelope. "Mr. Callahan, the HOA board asked me to deliver this notice personally." Robert took the envelope, already suspecting its contents. Inside was a formal complaint detailing 7 alleged covenant violations unrelated to his pond, from improper garbage placement to. The county boardroom was standing room only, with residents from Whispering Pines filling every available seat. Robert sat in the front row beside David Chen, Martha Jenkins, and James. The special hearing of the county commissioners regarding HOA governance had drawn not only community members but local press as well. A reporter from the regional newspaper scribbled notes near the back. Commissioner Eleanor Rodriguez rapped her gavel, bringing the room to order. This special session will address the petition submitted by Whispering Pines Ranch residents regarding alleged improper governance practices by their homeowners association board. She adjusted her glasses. "I understand we have 32 signed affidavits from property owners alleging various violations of state HOA regulations." At the respondents' table, Elaine Winters sat with her personal attorney, not the usual HOA counsel, but an expensive corporate lawyer from the city. Her normally immaculate appearance showed subtle signs of strain. A missed button on her blazer, hair slightly askew. The remaining board members were conspicuously absent. "Madam Commissioner," Elaine's attorney began, "my client objects to this entire proceeding. HOA governance is a private contractual matter between property owners, not subject to county oversight." Commissioner Rodriguez fixed him with a level stare. Council, you know very well that while HOAs have considerable autonomy, they remain subject to county ordinances on water management, environmental protection, and equitable governance. This commission has jurisdiction when those areas intersect. She nodded toward David. Mr. Chen, you may present your case. David approached the podium with a confidence that belied his recent arrival to the community. Commissioners, what began as a dispute over a single property owner's pond has revealed a pattern of governance abuses that demands intervention. For the next 40 minutes, David methodically presented evidence compiled from dozens of neighbors. He displayed charts showing the correlation between enforcement actions and proximity to Elaine's properties. He presented documentation of selective enforcement, inconsistent application of rules, and procedural violations. Most damaging was the evidence of Elaine's undisclosed business interests. Mrs. Winters has used 6 different LLCs to acquire properties within Whispering Pines, none of which were disclosed to the HOA membership as required by state law when she ran for board president. David presented corporate registration documents highlighting the connections. She has systematically used her position to enhance the value of these investments at the expense of other community members. When Robert's turn came to testify, he brought the county hydrologist's report on his pond project. The technical document had been transformed into an accessible presentation with Martha's help, showing how the pond actually improved water management for the entire watershed. My project doesn't just benefit my property, Robert explained, pointing to the water flow diagrams. It reduces flood risk for everyone downstream, creates wildlife habitat, and improves groundwater recharge. Instead of supporting this, the HOA threatened me with financially ruinous fines that would have bankrupted me in days. As testimony continued, Elaine's composure visibly deteriorated. When the commissioners finally granted her attorney time to respond, she grabbed the microphone herself. "This is nothing but a witch hunt," she declared, voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I've devoted years to maintaining property values in Whispering Pines. Without strict enforcement, the community would descend into chaos. These complainants simply don't understand the importance of aesthetic consistency and proper land management." Commissioner Rodriguez leaned forward. "Mrs. Winters, would you care to address the undisclosed property interests?" "My investments are private business matters," Elaine snapped. "I wasn't required to." State Statute 743.21 explicitly requires disclosure of all property interests within an HOA by board candidates. The commissioner interrupted, consulting a document before her. "Your financial stake in properties affected by your decisions represents a clear conflict of interest." The hearing stretched into the afternoon. When the commissioners finally recessed to deliberate, the atmosphere in the hallway outside was electric with anticipation. Robert found himself surrounded by neighbors offering encouragement and sharing their own stories of relief at finally confronting the HOA's overreach. Martha Jenkins approached with a cup of coffee for him. "You know," she said quietly, "win or lose today, you've already accomplished something remarkable." She nodded toward the clusters of animated conversation throughout the hallway. "Look at them, actually talking to each other, working together. That's not something I've seen in 20 years at Whispering Pines." Robert nodded, taking in the scene. Dr. Patterson deep in conversation with the Garcias, the Yamamotos comparing notes with the Johnsons, James organizing a coffee run for everyone. "Never thought my pond would cause all this." "It wasn't the pond," Martha replied with a knowing smile. "It was you deciding to stand your ground. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person refusing to be bullied." When the commissioners returned an hour later, their decision was unanimous. Commissioner Rodriguez read the ruling. "Given the evidence presented, this commission finds that the Whispering Pines Ranch HOA board has engaged in improper governance practices in violation of county and state regulations." She continued, listing remedies: immediate suspension of all pending fines and enforcement actions, removal of Elaine Winters from the board based on undisclosed conflicts of interest, appointment of a county mediator to oversee new board elections, and specific approval of Robert's pond project under the county's water management program, including a matching grant for completion. As the implications sank in, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the Whispering Pines residents. Elaine, face flushed with rage, stormed from the room without a word, her attorney hurrying behind. Outside the county building, as the afternoon sun bathed the mountains in golden light, Robert found himself the reluctant center of an impromptu celebration. Neighbors he'd barely spoken to in 15 years were shaking his hand, clapping his back, making plans for a community gathering at the pond site. "You started something here," David said, joining him at the edge of the crowd. "This isn't just about beating Elaine or saving your pond anymore." "What is it about?" Robert asked. James answered, appearing at his other side. "It's about remembering why we all moved out here in the first place. The freedom to build our lives on our own terms, but still be good neighbors to each other." As the gathering dispersed, Robert drove home with Sadie beside him in the truck. windows down to catch the crisp mountain air. When he crested the rise that overlooked his property, he stopped to take in the view. The pond basin, bathed in evening light, was already holding more water than he expected at this stage, the natural spring feeding it stronger than anticipated. At the pond's edge stood a familiar figure, Martha Jenkins leaning on her cane, watching a blue heron picking its way along the shallows. Robert parked and walked down to join her.